Well, the first float setup that I'm going to use tonight is the jig, but with the baited needle below. Well, good afternoon and welcome back to another squid fishing tutorial. In this video, we're going to be using squid jigs and also squid baited hooks. Now, both of these I am going to fish under a float, whether it's a baited needle on its own, a baited needle with a jig, or just a jig on its own. 3 simple, straightforward and effective ways to catch squid under a float. And I'm going to show you how to rig these up, and then a little later in the video we're going to go out and use them, test them, fish and catch squid. Before we get actually into the jigs and the rigs, I am using for float fishing a small 7-foot rod, which is a Penn Squadron 3 Labrax. Nice and cheap and cheerful, nice bend, fast action, but really does the job when fishing with a float. I'm also using a small 3000 reel, 15-pound braid, but with an extra long leader of about 25 foot, but we'll go into that reason after. Now, the first rig I'm going to use is just using the squid hook. Now, the squid hook has to be baited. No squid in the world will just go for this. I usually tend to slide down a pilchard or a sprat, or the bait that's actually in the area present where you're fishing. A small kind of fish which fits about 3/4 slid down towards the hooks where the squid can come in and grab it. A lot of the time the squid will start grabbing midway, but then home in and get their tentacles stuck, and that's why I use this. With my leader line, first you need to plumb the depth. Now, when float fishing, it's best to use a float stop. Float stops look like so. Usually you can buy these from your tackle shop. Rubber, little balls with the line going through. And what you need to do is just slide your line through the end, like so. Pulling or threading a couple of these onto your line. There you have it. And what these act as is a stopper. So your float can stop at a certain point, leaving whatever you are fishing below, underneath, and at a certain depth. Next, we add a bead. I'm using an orange bead here, but it could be any color that you like. Thread that onto your line, and that will stop again at your stops. And that's where your float will stop every time, depending on where you've plumbed the depth. Next is your float. I am using a nice big float. Now, the reason I'm using a big float is, if I'm using a smaller one and my jig or my rig is too heavy, combined with the lead weight that goes underneath it, it will either sink down too quick, or you will not be able to detect when a squid is on your line. So I prefer to take a big one. Again, with always a float, thread it through the top, nice and simple. And what will happen, it will come out of the end and then you can pull it. Again, clear to see where the float hits the bead and the stop. Next is the lead weight, which is going to hold your rig down. I tend to go for a ball weight, which has a hole in it. You thread it through and it just sits on your line like so. This will slide all the way up to your float. I then place another bead, doesn't matter on the colour, and that slides straight up to your lead. And then what I do is I tie off to a swivel, like so. The knot is really up to the angler, but I tend to do what I call the fisherman knot. And there we have it. The float setup is pretty much ready. Again, float stops, bead, float, weight, bead, swivel. And this is going to be the main body of two of the rigs that we're going to use. The business end is going to be different, but this can be the same at the start for both of the rigs. Always ensuring that your float is big enough, but also your weight is not too heavy. I recommend going a little bit lighter than what's recommended for the float, just because your terminals and bait below may be a little heavier. Now for the first rig, just using the squid hook which is baited, I'm just going to use this bright coloured line so it's better for you to see. Now this is going to be situated underneath the float which we've just created. This is simple but very, very effective, especially on the rough nights where the jigs aren't working and the squid are homing in on bait. To start off with, I unravel some line, usually around 3 foot, and clip it off like so. On the business end, which is going to attach to the float or the terminal, I like to use a small clip like so. Very easy to clip on, very easy to clip off, very easy to change if you're changing tactics or the way you're going to go about targeting the squid. Now as you can see on this, it's got a bar that faces in and a bar that's sealed. You want to tie your line to the underside where the bar faces in. Again, really up to you on your knot. I'm just going to go for a blood knot. A few times around, in, pull, nice and tight, and then snip the excess off, like so. And then on the business end, I am going to go for a swivel clip. But there you have it, the swivel clip on the end, and my small attaching clip. Now, the swivel clip is where you are going to attach the hook, like so. At the end of most hooks, they have a hole, and it's so easy just to put that into there, like so, and then clip it. And that is ready to be fished, like so. Now the reason for the upside down facing down clip is when you attach it to your float, you can just hook it straight on like so. Very simple, very quick, very easy. So there's our first rig, the baited squid hook. Really effective, really simple, and if you're like me that sometimes cannot be asked to just cast and wind squid jigs, you can put a couple of these out in the depths, put them to the depths that you like, and then just leave them to fish them. First of all, again, I'm just using a nice bright coloured line so you guys can see it. I am going to cut off 3 foot, 2, 3. Snipped, like so. This is going to be the main body of our rig. Second of all, using my line again, I'm going to snip off another foot, separate to our main body. This separate piece of line is going to act as a boom for our jig. So first of all, I'm lining up parallel both of my lines together. The tips pretty much in line with each other. Holding them together, bringing my thumb down to join them two together, I am then going to create a loop. The loop is created by pushing the two lines towards each other, like so. And with the two lines from the top, I'm going to bring it through the back and out the top once, twice. That's caused a double wraparound and the loop, and then I'm just going to pull it tight, lubricating it. wrap my fingers around it to make sure it's tight and pull. And that's caused a kind of X shape, like so. Like so. Then, leaving the long strand of body, I'm then going to snip the bottom section off, like so, and then I'm going to burn the edge. Please be safe when burning, like so. So now we have three, a boom, and then also the top section. Now, the next part is pretty simple. I'm going to add a clip, like we were using before, to every end. Again, at the top, the clip is going to be the pointed end at the bottom and the closed end at the top. Again, depends on what the angler wants to use. But then on the bottom end, I'm going to use a swivel clip again. The reason, because that's going to attach to my hook where the bait would be. Pull, snip, burn. And there you have it. And then last but not least, the boom. Now the reason I use this rig and no terminals, it's just so simple and so effective and so easy. You can do it on the rocks without having a three-way swivel, and it's just so simple. When tying the boom clip, we go opposites. This time, the closed end will be at the bottom. The reason for that is we're going to be able to clip the lure to this. Put it tight, snip if needed, and burn. The swivel clip will have the baited hook at the bottom. Again, that's why we use a swivel clip and not the small clip. Very easy to take off. It also spins if there's a squid on it, and it attaches purely and nicely. On the boom, we are going to have a jig. And like I was just saying to you, using the bar that's pointed in, you can then press the squid jig against it and it's clipped on nice and easy. And there we have it. What's going to happen is the squid jig is going to be above the baited needle, just floating around in the tide, and the needle's just going to be sitting static with a bait on it. Again, preference to you what bait you use. I just recommend using the bait that's present in the area that you're fishing. Also, just so you can see, using that clip again, this can also be clipped straight onto your float like so. The floated jig and bait hook. Now, the last float setup I'm going to create is what I call the live bait float setup. This is a little bit different because you're not using a lead, you're just using a float, and you're just using a squid jig. Now, when I lived in Australia, I now live in the UK, we used to use this technique for squid. It was massive over there, but it also can be used when fishing for bass or any other species that would take a live bait. Now this one's very simple, very effective, and this is where the long leader on my reel comes in. To start off with, this is the leader that's running off my reel. As I said, I've got about 25 foot on it. Now the reason is for this line goes straight to my jig, so I'm using a 25-pound fluorocarbon leader. Now what I'm going to do, as always, using this fluorocarbon that you can just see here, is put on a float stop. Again, that's the float stop. It comes on a small little dongle like so. You can buy these from your tackle shop, and I am going to thread on line through the loop, and a couple. The reason I put on 2, one might break. And I'm going to slide that onto my line, like so. Next, again, a bead. We'll go for a nice bright orange bead. And that sits like so, and that falls straight up to my lure stops. Next is the float. Again, I'm going to use a nice big float, but in this instance, depending on the size of your jig, you can use a small one if you like. I'm going to go for the big one anyway, because I like to be able to cast these far, but you can use a small one. Let's put yourself in the position if you are fishing right now. It's a nice, beautiful, calm day. I'm probably going to use the light one. It's a heavy day, it's a bit rougher. The tide's moving a little bit quicker. I might use the heavier one. Food for thought. I'm then going to thread my line again onto the float. So much easier using a fluoro or a leader than threading braid through your float. And that comes out the other side. Now, there's going to be no weight. There's going to be no bead. There's going to be no swivel. This is going to tie directly to your jig. And the jig I'm going to use is this beauty, one of my favourite colours, especially fishing here in the UK. I do like an orange or a red, but on the day when the squid are being finicky and they want something natural, this browny green grey back with the multicolour is an absolute killer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie directly to this. Now what you can do is you could put a clip there, or you can tie straight on. I'm going to tie straight on, and there you have it. And what you're going to have is a rig that looks like so. It kind of looks odd, it kind of looks strange, but what's going to happen is when you cast, depending on where your float stops are, your jig, especially if it's weighted, I would recommend a weighted jig, is going to slowly fall away from your float. Fall away, fall away, fall away, fall away, fall away, until your float hits the stopper. And then what's going to happen is this jig is just going to float around in the tide very naturally, like so, until a squid comes along. Not my favourite float technique to use, but it's a different floating rig which I have used, and I have caught squid doing it, especially down in Australia, but I have caught them here in Jersey. You might want it really deep, you might want it really shallow, you might be running this over really shallow ground. You just want your jig to be situated on top of a weed bed, over some seagrass, over some rough stuff. This is a quality, simple and effective setup for that kind of fishing. Before we do go, another quick tip for float fishing. I tend to float fish at night. So seeing your float at night can sometimes be a little bit difficult. If you go to your tackle shop and buy a starlight, which usually goes on the tip of your rod, make an insertion in the top of your float and place one of these in it. This means you'll be able to see your float at night. Well, the first float setup that I'm going to use tonight is the jig, but with the baited needle below. So what I've done is underneath I've got a pilchard tail, as you can see, just put onto the needle itself, threaded it on. I've clipped it back on with the clip, and then just situated above it I've just got a small, really light jig. So I'm doubling up on my chances. Obviously the float will indicate when there's a squid there, it will pull it down, or it will do some weird stuff like sit on its side. Now make sure that you're not too close to the bottom, but close enough to the bottom, because usually that's where the squid are. Now if you are stuck on the bottom, either your bottom hook will get stuck and it'll just constantly be just pulling your float under the surface. It won't be like a straight down like a squid would do when it takes it away. It would kind of just be hanging just underneath the surface. Also, sitting on its side, the float being on the surface like so and just sitting on its side constantly like that means it's on the bottom as well. So I'm going to put this out, and hopefully I can show you that this works. Maybe we'll get a double up with the decoy on the top. Well, there's the first squid. that's fallen to the bait. As you can see, hooked nicely there. It's gone for the pilchard on the bottom on the hook, just taking it nicely. It's not the biggest squid in the world, but it just shows you that the float does work. It was kind of just going down slowly, then coming back up, and then going back down a bit deeper, and that just shows you that the squid was on it and it was pulling down, down, down. And yeah, as I was saying, there's the float, there's the jig, and there's the first squid of the session. As I say, not very big, but it just shows you proof in the pudding that it does work. Perfect. Let's go. Well, I've just moved places because it was just getting a little bit windy in the other place. I'm still on the float and I'm still on the jig and bait rig. Now this time, nothing's actually taken my pilchard on the actual big long hook, but the top one has taken one. So the jig, which is sitting above it, which is just sitting, bobbing around, just a small little one, has taken this lovely squid. Now it's not a big squid again, it's a little bigger, but hey ho, it just goes to show that you don't need to be moving that jig around. These inquisitive creatures will probably come and have a look at the bait, have a snatch at it, then go, oh, hold on a minute, there is a jig, or, well, not a jig, but you know what I mean.